Good afternoon and welcome to Chalmers University of Technology and the Department of Applied IT. My name is Jonas Landgren. I'm an associate professor at the department and head of division of interaction design. And today I will serve as the chairman for Pawel Wozniak's PhD defense here today. Okay, we have some main characters. We have, of course, Pawel, the respondent, and we also have the faculty opponent here, Sebastian Boring, associate professor in human-centered computing at University of Copenhagen. We have the committee members as well, also a very important group of people. We have Hans Gellertjärn, professor in interactive systems at Lancaster University. We have Urban Uldén, associate professor in informatics at Gothenburg University, also here at Department of Applied IT. And we have Jonas Lövgren, professor in interaction design at Linköping University. I would like to wish all of you very welcome here today. But we also have a few more characters, actually. We also have Pawel's supervisors. We have Professor Morten Fjeld. We have Professor Staffan Björk. He's a professor in interaction design. I just learned to know that at Gothenburg University, but still at our department. And we also have Assistant Professor Mohammad Ubaid. And Mohammad is currently at Koch University in Istanbul. It's also important that to inform that Pawel has conducted his research at the Interaction Design Division at Chalmers University of Technology, and the work has been funded by the Marie Curie program. What else is important today? The procedures. Okay, there might be some of you that have not attended a PhD defense previously, and maybe you're a bit nervous how the procedure will go on and take place and so on. But we have a strict procedure to follow. So first, Pawel, you will start and first mention if there are any corrections that you would like to do and that needs to be addressed as a start. Then Pawel will give a short presentation of his work. After that, the real part of the game really starts. Then it's time for Sebastian as the opponent to ask questions and initiate a discussion. Sometimes even a debate. And when the opponent has finished, it's time for the committee members to get the opportunity to ask questions and also debate if that is necessary. Lastly, you as the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions. And when we all feel that everyone has had the opportunity to ask questions, we will close the public part of the ceremony, and the committee will withdraw and have a meeting to discuss if Pawel will fail or pass. Meanwhile, the audience will be served snacks and drinks outside here. And after some time, it can be a short meeting, it can be a longer meeting, then the committee members will come out from the meeting and in public present their decision. Okay. So before we start, I would just like to give a special thanks to Visual Arena for being our hosts here today. Pawel, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonas. All right, very good. We begin with the errata. The errata is available for you over there on the table. There are no major changes in the thesis, but there's a couple of spelling mistakes that I've spotted. So if you want your copy to be complete, please do grab this A6 sheet that's available over there. So then you're good, and perhaps we could distribute these a bit later on. But again, there's only a couple of spelling mistakes and one layout mistake, and that's it. So there are no major changes in the thesis. All right, so I'm going to try and proceed, and as Jonas mentioned, I will give a 15 minutes introduction to what is in the thesis. This is intended mainly for you who haven't read the book, because it is rather long. And I'll quickly go through what is contained there. All right, so you may have noticed that the thesis is called Beyond Gadgetry, Reflections on Tech and User-Driven Research in Human-Computer Interaction. The thesis is a collection of a number of works that I've conducted throughout my time in Chalmers, and it strives to provide a comprehensive overview of the activities. But yet, every story needs to have a beginning, and if this changes... Oh, there we go. My story begins with Mark Weiser, this guy, and I've been known to say that one of my major issues is being in love with a dead guy. So he died a while ago, but back in 2009, I started reading his works, and I got really into the idea of making a difference through designing for everyday interactions and building HCI that actually affects lives. And throughout my work at Chalmers and throughout this thesis, I tried to bring this bigger message of interfacing with the everyday, if you will. All right, so let's see what's actually contained in the thesis. So, if you've ever read a thesis in Sweden, you may expect that there's an introductory part, and then there's the papers. After conferring with my supervisors, we went for a somehow different layout. So there's essentially 5 distinct pages in the thesis. First, there's a introduction, where I review a number of works that set the context of the reflection that's contained in the thesis. Then there's 3 parts where I comment on the papers I've published, and these are papers about multi-device interactions, a case study from Volvo, and a number of papers on HCI and sports. And they are laid out in the thesis like this. So you can see there's 8 papers in total, and in this presentation I'll give you brief information on each of the parts, essentially. So we start with the intro. Again, if you've seen a couple of theses, you may expect that I've re-reviewed all the literature that I have contained in the papers. It is often customary to notice the most important works, but because I wanted to reflect more on my work and gain a deeper understanding of it, I actually propose a different review of literature. I focused on the works within the HCI domain that address design-based research, and I review a number of works and try to set up a context for reflecting on my papers. The result of that literature review, which I then contribute in the thesis, is this model, which I call the contribution type family model, which integrates a number of contribution types that past work has mentioned that can come from design-based research. I also adopt a definition of design-based research, which perhaps is not the most comprehensive one, but works in the thesis. Namely, I discuss all products of what we know as the interaction design process in HCI as possible products of design-based research, and try to set these in that model. And I then later reuse that model to reflect on my own work. All right, and now we're gonna quickly go through the papers. So, paper 1 is about visioning and visions and thinking of possible futures that are better futures augmented through technology. And in this paper, we create a vision of new environments based on multi-device interactions that engage citizens in discussions and augment everyday spaces like pubs or cafes. What's interesting about this paper is that we worked with people who are from social science, and we try to couple insights that social science has about those kinds of spaces to actual proposed technical developments. Next is paper 2 called Mokotop, and it's the first system I built here at Chalmers. It's a prototype system that enables users to use multiple devices to access information, and the multi-device spatially aware environment is simulated with a pixel sense table. The third paper is a follow-up to that paper, where we actually let go of the table and we implemented a similar system using motion tracking. And in this, we focused on accessing information visualizations and effectively retrieving numbers or categories from a number of data structures. The fourth paper, and the last in that part, is about sense making, so the process of meaning making, if you will, where groups of users use multiple devices that are aware of each other's positions to conduct a longer thinking process. And in my case, it's solving a crime mystery. And we look at how people can effectively use motion track devices to achieve that. Then we go to a slide that depicts what we actually did. So you may possibly recall that we are actually using this room because that's where most of the research happened. So we've spent long hours here prototyping and building those systems. And in the thesis, I tried to convene some of the lessons and experiences of actually conducting the studies that I could not fit in the papers. Next, the next part of the thesis is a single case study paper, and it is there because despite this being only one paper, this was a lot of work and a lot of things that I've learned while I was a consultant at Volvo. So there we contribute a new process for building big data systems, a way of working with intermediate and end customers and dealing with vast amount of data, and ways to build effective prototypes that essentially lead to final systems. The fourth part, or the third paper part of the thesis, is about sports. And together with my colleague Christina, we've engaged in a number of projects where we explored how people use technology while practicing sports, and how the technology affects the experience of practicing sports. Specifically, we conducted field studies, interviews, and focus groups to understand the experience of advanced amateur runners, so people who are following a training program. Based on that, we published two papers. One of them looked at specifically how people motivate themselves to practice regularly, and how they motivate themselves to run regularly, and how this can affect possible future designs of technology. In the second paper, we built a device that enables remote cheering. So it enables remote participants, friends and family, to take part in a running race. And of course, those two papers, as I already mentioned, required a lot of field studies, lots of engagement with actual end users, lots of sweat and pain as well, and a lot of work on electronics. And this is what makes our research different, what has been done in the past. So we are the first to engage in the field with real races that are organized by external organizations within the ACI and sports domain. Finally, paper 8, the last paper of the thesis, is about how users build a game for themselves, how a group of users who are a group that practices regularly has built a game for supporting the social relationships within a group, and how we as designers of future gamification systems or future designers of technology that supports physical activity can learn from those insights. The last part of the thesis is about reflecting, is about using the model that I built in the beginning of the thesis to reflect of my own work. And you can see that the papers are pretty spread out on the model. And you can see that they probably come in groups, and those groups need to be interpreted. And I have offered some possible interpretation of that in the thesis. All right? So this is all I had to say. and now we'll have the discussion.
Thank you so much, Pawel. Before we move on to and give the opportunity to Sebastian, we do some sort of testing with the microphone so we get feedback of audio. So can you double check? Så mycket andning. Okej. Okay. Say something.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh. Test out. Oh.
Excellent. Okay, then we close this part of the defense. Thank you for the presentation, Pawel. And the floor is yours.
Am I live? Good. Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation. Also, thanks for the thesis. Gave me a good read. Took some time, as you mentioned, but yeah, it was very, very interesting to read. I've debated very long on my trip here. Train trips take some time from Copenhagen. I debated a long time where to start. Do I start in the front? Do I start in the back? Do we go chronologically or not? And I decided to actually start in the back, specifically with paper 8. And while I was reading that, I couldn't shake off one thing of my head, wondering when you will come to the technology part here. I know it's a user-driven inquiry, and you talk a lot about a system. So I think my first question is, what is a system here? What do you define as system, specifically in paper 8?
Yep. So we have debated this for a really long time. The inquiry seemed interesting, so we went through it, and because we knew that it could eventually lead us to some insights, but we were asking the same questions. If we were wondering if this could actually influence technology, and then so after finishing the study and reflecting, we think that the fact that this particular system is paper-based is rather a minor concern. And the system is the way where those little boards and the tags they have, how they fit into the social context and the activity context of what they're doing. That is the system. And then we also use this parallel thing that if you look at computer games, many of the mechanics that we know from computer games, they actually started with tabletop or pen and paper RPG. So we want to fit into that spirit a bit. We want to basically say that here's a pen and paper kind of thing, but from a mechanics point of view, from the way this particular system is embedded in the environment, the physical form, whether it's digital or analog, doesn't matter that much.
Yeah. So I was wondering if we talk about a system quite often. Oh, yes. We have time. No worries. Thinking about the word system, I always have that. I'm also coming from an engineering background like you. So when I think about a system, it's something mechanical, something digital, and all that you use there is paper. And the only digital part was basically a Facebook webpage where I was like, okay, that's not a system in that sense. But thinking about it, I went on and I wrote down this question actually. What is the technical takeaway message? What can we... You phrase that very often as we can use that to influence the way we design future technologies. Do you believe this, and if so, how will this help us to design future technologies rather than designing something else?
So I strongly believe that if we try to recreate the process of how that system happened to build a more complex, more widespread digital system, there's a high chance it will work. And then we have this model that we propose over there, and we believe that you can really take and operationalize that model when you're conducting an inquiry. And I mean, it is from a very practical point of view. I think it's a believable situation where a fitness club, because I mean the environment we're working on is essentially a more elaborate fitness club with a theme, but that's it. Hires an interaction design company to build a system that will support motivation. And I think that they can at least use our paper to know where to start, to know how how to approach the social challenges, and the system mechanics challenges that are involved in such a design. So I wouldn't dare say that. I mean, it gives you a prescription of how to do that, but I think it tells you where to start.
Okay. Let me ask a little bit differently with respect. When you set out to do this, were you at any point, it relates a bit to paper 6 and 7 as well, were you at any point thinking about technology? Were you at any point thinking that there will be technology evolving out of this? And if so, how were you doing that? Specifically, let's stay with paper 8 for now.
So, I mean, I think if you contrast that with paper 6, like what was really appealing to us in conducting that inquiry is, if you take the context of paper 6, where we specifically set out to engage with the users to influence technology and build very tangible guidelines, we thought, oh, this is actually the reverse. So the users have already built something, and how do we try to extract that? And it's sort of a question of control. And in the motivation paper, we could control the questions, and we could at least try to get the information that we thought would influence technology. While here on the other side, well, we had to take it all in. The only thing we could do, we couldn't modify the system. The only thing we could do is try to understand it as much as possible, and then try to relate that to technology based on whatever experience we have. So, I mean, I guess the chronology is also important here. So this is like, time-wise, this is the latest paper. So we really tried to sort of somehow tie it up with what we've done in the motivation paper. Yeah.
So given one of your claims was, if we gave or support to people like that trainer, I think you called him M, or maybe he called himself M. If you give tools to design these things in a digital way, because I think you claimed he couldn't do that, and apparently he didn't know anyone who could do that. What would happen if you go to a different fitness center with a different trainer, with your tools to digitally develop something? What would happen then? How do you expect this process to change?
So I believe that, I mean, an important thing that digital tools can surely offer, and what the analog couldn't, is the flexibility. So here, I mean, in the process of actually crafting the way the system works and the way it sort of physically works with the pins and the board and that, it was a pretty long process where they had multiple prototypes, and they also heavy influence by other work. So if you look in the paper, I mean, it is based on a computer game, which I dare not mention. But if we have digital tools, they are quite flexible. So they would, for example, enable creating new narratives, because it no longer needs to be the narrative of that particular game. Again, like we have a skill tree that is copied from the game, but that skill tree can be easily modified to accommodate the intricacies of a particular training regime. Here was sort of the other way around. They took the trees and they wondered how they could be modified to make it in line with what the training process was. If you have digital tools, and if you have a toolkit that will enable creating such systems, then it could be really flexible and can be, and that also ties it to the previous papers. It can fit nicely into those touch points of motivation. Yeah.
Did the users of the system ever say let's agree it's a system, but did the users ever say that they would like to have it digital? And users here being not the trainer per se, but maybe more like the people go into the fitness center.
So this is the thing that we also debated quite a lot. What is the importance of tangibility there? Because I mean, because being analog, it is limited to a location and is limited to a finite set of artifacts. And definitely there's the social element of gathering around a board that's limited in size. So I would say that's an open question, how distributing this would actually affect the motivation. The scenarios that we thought of is having digital systems that are flexible in that department as well, where some of the information will be only available on location and some of the information be distributed. But that, I mean, in order to give a good answer to that, I guess we should just run a comparative study.
So That was one of the points that actually struck me at paper 8 is that there, while it is a user inquiry, there's no real debate as to do users actually want that, which is sort of the purpose sometimes of a user inquiry, or at least to what extent do they want it and how do they want it. So that struck me a bit, and that transitions a little bit also into, or forward transitions from paper 7, where you had this neat device. And one particular thing about paper 7 that struck me is that you very often, you discussed the difference between associative and dissociative runners, right? So people that, I don't know who didn't read it, people that associate themselves with reality while running, or live in their own little world while running to fade out reality. This is what I understood from it. And you talk several times in that particular paper about designing something that is inclusive, that includes both of these user groups. And I was very curious as to why it was so important for you to include everyone in a single device type of thing, because you needed to design this watch-like device. But why include two obviously fundamentally different user groups in one device?
I mean, the answer is quite plain, really, because if you look deeper into that psych literature on that topic, most amateur runners, they will switch between those two modes. They will use them at different stages in the race. And so research in sports psychology has shown that most people will use both, usually with a dominant type. Mm-hmm. But that's definitely they're using both, and usually they're also not aware of the fact that they're using those methods. So it would be quite difficult to sort of to identify what the user group would be if you want to offer the device just to one of them.
How would such a device relate to an associative and dissociative runner as it is right now? Because it is a very real thing, right? So
I mean, that was one of the sort of key design challenges that we faced. That it's not too obtrusive, so it doesn't throw you off and can be ignored. But on the other hand, it must be noticeable when you want to notice it. And that's why we went for this sort of lightweight feedback, and this is sort of based on some past work on ambiguity and some past work on remote communication, intimacy. The Hassenzahl had those lamps which remote family members could communicate with. And we wanted to be somewhere in the middle ground of that design space, so that when you're really in the zone and you don't need support, it doesn't vibrate so much that you have to pay attention to it. But on the other hand, if you need support and you're fully aware of your environments, that it's easily noticeable. Okay. And I mean, you can see in the paper that didn't work for all the users, but I think we managed to strike the middle ground for the majority of them. Yeah.
If you were to redo that, and I tell you, for whatever reason, the user group you have to design that for, also runners, don't want to wear anything. Like have clothes, of course, let's stay with that, but don't want to wear any tangible wearable devices. What would you do?
Well, I mean, we are, and I think I can openly say that, we are investigating quadcopters for the same purpose right now, in the anticipation of the future where these proliferate and become easily available and autonomous. An external aid as a sort of a self-propelled craft could be an alternative. We have also considered wearables, which would be integrated in the clothes, which is also a viable technological perspective. But they have the issues that we actually faced in the first phase of the Rufus paper, because the glanceability of those is complicated, because having something on a sleeve or having something on your shorts, while it is easy to integrate, and it could, like, if you assume that those wearable electronics are well integrated, it wouldn't be obtrusive, but noticing it could be an issue. So that's definitely that's definitely one direction to explore from a technical perspective.
Yeah, staying a bit at the technical perspective, you it was to some degree on page 170. It was not really clear to me that vibration was included. Then 171 it was included, so that was fine. And you talk in the beginning about these signal separations, where users said, okay, I can separate 3 different. You had light patterns, and you also eliminated the question nicely as to if you have a colorblind person because you have different rhythms and lengths, which was very nice. Can't you do the same with vibration only? So in the sense that I don't have to look at the watch.
So what we notice, and again, that's also in sport physiology, the perception of vibration will change with exertion. So that's why we sort of opted for this dual feedback, especially because in the preliminary studies that we did with people, we got requests for visual and vibration with equal frequency. So we couldn't make a clear design decision just based on preliminary prototyping, and so we decided for both, because we also like the other thing is that I've run extended hours with a number of those devices, and I also sort of discovered that the vibration is sometimes easy to feel and sometimes it isn't. And then we ran our first test with the bigger device, and in that particular version, I guess that could also be the reason of your confusion. So in the first version, the device only had vibration in the red signal. Mm-hmm. If I can, maybe I'll just bring it up so that it's a bit clearer.
Yeah, let's do that.
So this is the web page, and we have the that doesn't work. Maybe now. All right. So we had those 3 signals, and in the first version, which should be here, in the big device, it only vibrated when you used the red signal.
Okay.
And we had this sort of smaller scale in the wild study, and many of the users running there noticed that I only noticed it on the red. So sort of the obvious and easy design decision would be to adopt different vibration patterns for all the signals.
Yeah.
And then so in the smaller version, it vibrated all 3 signals. Yeah.
When you look at these, well, we talked a little bit about the outlook of paper 8, but when you look at paper 7, where do you go next with this? It's like I know when we do research, quite often we write a paper and we submit it to conference accept it, and then we have to write something in future work, which we usually never do, or very often don't do, but it has to be there. Yeah. What would you do if someone throws a pile of money at you now? What would you do with this? How would you go further with it?
So I've actually recently written up a proposal. I have 2 ideas that are sort of perhaps just like immediate follow-ups. First thing is I would like to test it with longer distances, because we only had people, like the maximum distance we had here was a half marathon. And I would really like people to test it on longer distances. I was thinking of Vasaloppet, so the long cross-country skiing run here in Sweden, where just like multiple hours, and just like the technical limitations of this are already okay. We can easily deploy it for several hours, but I would like to see if people develop different strategies for communicating, because I think at least our works it points in the direction that people do want some sort of a communication. But what kind of communication that is still an open question.
So you see there is a lot of work still to be done. I really like that part of the thesis, actually, and you see where I'm going to the other part. I still like that too, but have more questions there. In line with if we think about paper 5, so paper 5 was a Volvo paper, which I thought was super interesting, because Volvo is not exactly a small company. You also nicely outlined that, how big they really are. And you stated, and that was a bit surprising, as far as I saw that, it was stated in a figure caption that the system is now in beta use. This has to be an abstract intro everywhere. It's you design something that one of the largest truck manufacturers in the world uses, in the very least in beta. So make sure you make that more prominent at some point.
I can comment on that. Well, I think I can say that, Robert. Is that the text of the abstract, it took several weeks to negotiate it,
okay.
And it has been toned down on purpose.
Okay, so that is just okay. Corporate involvement in research. Is it still in beta? Do you still have contact with the teams? and what are they doing?
I think last time I spoke with Rupert, he said the project was continuing. However, yeah, he is confirming. He is confirming. However, I sort of especially in last year, I focused on writing up my research, so I've had less to do with Volvo.
Yeah.
But yeah, Robert is confirming, so I hope the product is still there.
We all, or I at the very least do, because I think it's a very exciting aspect. Very interesting to me though was you talked a lot about stakeholders there. Let me just, and the stakeholders you chose in the end were the heads of divisions or of different countries at the very least. EMEA, which I had to look up, and then later you clarified it. And I was somewhat surprised how many higher levels are on top of that hierarchy. So who comes next and next and next until we reach the CEO, president, or whoever?
I mean, so Volvo Group is a complex thing, but like we work with used trucks, and used trucks EMEA specifically, they have a boss, and then they have regional bosses, and this is who we talk with. But of course, there's like the intermediate management here in the headquarters is actually higher than the regional management. But technically, there's like so I'd say between the people who we worked with and the CEO of Volvo Group, there's at least 5 levels. But I wouldn't say it's not exactly linear. Also because it's Sweden.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is I wrote down, and you have that way later in the thesis as well, which I thought was funny. I wrote down the term grassroots democracy. Right? So basically, what you're gonna do is like you run around in a company until you find a person that really is interested in your product, which also has the possibility or power to convince at least the next superior, and then you let it bubble up. Do you think that's a fair approach to something? Or do you think, or what's an alternative approach to it? Let me ask that way.
I mean, and I think I can say that it's like my initial approach was to sort of politely ask to have access to people with the knowledge that we want for the product. But then it is the issue of digging down through the hierarchies. And of course, there are usually, I mean, because the data we had was from a number of complex systems, and those systems, they had legacy developments, and they've been developed at different times, and they played different purposes within the group. They were very competent people, but none of them had an overview of sort of the large data set, because they were just very competent within that narrow area. And because those data sets were never used together before, they couldn't know. And then I started asking if we could get to people who actually know the cars, and it turned out it's not that easy. And then we managed to convince one of the bosses in used trucks, and he told us, yeah, you should talk to the people who actually sell the trucks on site. So it was sort of in a way we managed to effectively pitch it to someone high up, and then they gave us the go ahead to dig down. But I mean, I do believe that it was like also goodwill and the fact that big data sounds good, and it sounded really good by then. And that sort of attracted his attention, because he may as well said no. Maybe he just looked at me and Rupert, and then maybe we looked trustworthy, and then he decided to assign some time of his people in the field. And the other interesting bit here is that usually the managers here at headquarters would still listen in to make sure that we're not wasting the other people's time. And I think sort of the idea really was sold only after we finished the first workshops, because I could, in the eyes of the managers, I could see they didn't believe in the methodology, because you know like Volvo is more of an engineering company. So and when I showed people we had those warm-up exercises, and there's the duck that's in the paper, and when I showed them the duck, they said, no, this is not going to work. Like, they're going to laugh you off.
Did they?
They didn't. No, they actually started. I mean, you have to imagine, because we're sitting in a boardroom at Volvo headquarters, and all the people from Europe, they're on link. I can't see them because video is not allowed in Volvo. And the manager's sitting there with me in a room. They're afraid that we're going to be laughed off if I show them duck. And then I press the button, and no one's laughing. And I think that was the moment when the idea was sold. That they understood that the only way to get the information that we need from the people was to actually engage with them and start digging.
Okay, I was. Let me go up to the challenge I wrote down here. I was wondering if you can actually even involve higher level, and if you go to a company, provided that you have a certain standing, provided that you, which we all don't probably, provided that you know, I don't know, you went to school with the son of the boss of Volvo. I don't know. There's certain ways to know people. If it sometimes would also work if you go to a company and say, you know what, you have to do this. Here's why, and you tell that to a CEO, not to someone on ground level. I was wondering if that would happen too, and if so, what type of inquiry, from your perspective, that would be. So it's not tech driven. Now maybe it's tech driven.
I mean, our thing was sort of a bottom up kind of thing. So we thought, oh, here's what we have. How do we figure what possible positive effects we could have on the group? But I think, I mean, you can sort of, if you have stuff that's top down, if you have really good ideas that require tools, I guess that would be the best way to approach them. Sort of start at the top level and then have them assign resources. But we were sort of like, we started from the other end. We started from, oh, here's a data set. What do we do? And then we needed to find someone who would give meaning to that. And it turned out that the people who had the actual possible meanings, they were sort of lower in the hierarchy. But if you know the engineering backbone well enough, and you have ideas that already have an engineering backing, there's actual technical knowledge behind it, then it could be easier to sell it on the top, on the sort of higher levels. Or
you use what you write in the prologue of that paper. You use a lot of buzzwords. That could also. I mean,
I think I mentioned this quite a lot in the thesis. That, I mean, we can't hide the idea that this was buzzwords inspired, that entire thing. When I met with the innovation manager in Volvo for the first time, he said, "Listen, we have to have this thing called big data because it's fashionable, and also IBM is on board." And then we had to make sense out of it.
So what type of inquiry is that? When you set out to work with Volvo?
In all honesty, my my supervisor told me I should go and talk to Volvo because it's probably a good idea. And it took me at least a month or two to actually figure out what my role there could be. And then I realized that, sort of, given my skills and given what they're trying to do, the role was to turn the inquiry from a sort of systems integration kind of thing into a user, and I dare say user-centered design inquiry, or at least have the interface to whatever system integration they were doing as a sort of at least a bit user-centered system.
Okay, well, why do you think Volvo didn't do that on their own? Why did they hire an external consultant? If they have the vision, it's like big data is a fashionable word. We have thousands and tens of thousands of employees. They should find someone in that company that could do it. So why do you think they specifically hired an external to do this?
I don't think that. I mean, it's changing since I no longer work for Volvo, but I know that I hired some new people. It is still primarily an engineering company, and the sort of UX tradition over there is not that strong. They've been and specifically within Volvo Group Telematics, which is a very tech-oriented company, where they basically develop technical solution and deliver them to partners that are also very technical. There's not much space for the end user, and that particular system that we were developing, suddenly there was a particular group of end users within the Volvo Group, which is not the regular case. Usually they develop a system that's then integrated into a truck, or they develop a system and they sell it to an external company, and then someone integrates it into a end user product.
Okay. Did you? I'm always curious when things happen like here's a product, here's a system, here's technology where you can do things 3 times as fast and 3 times as efficient. If someone comes to me like that and presents that to me, my first concern would be, does this mean I work 3 times less and thus get 3 times less salary and so on? what types of fears were you actually confronted with from your users at Volvo?
So I think initially, I mean, those users, at least that was my impression, they've never been involved in creating a new thing before. So it was would have a bizarre experience for them to be asked, oh, what are your pains? What kind of practical difficulties are you facing? What kind of data are you missing? And they've been trained to rely on their guts. That's a fact. So they've been people who just like they've been in the business for a really long time, and they were hired where they were hired because they had really good gut about the trucks. Because basically the job they did was there was a random truck coming in, and within a couple of hours they were able to make a guess of an estimate price, and they didn't make so many mistakes as the other person. That was their job. So definitely there were fears of computers doing it. But then once the workshop progressed, they understood that there was no way to replace them. There's like, even though the data set is vast, like the sort of technical perspective of the computer actually making any decisions is still very far away, because the number of factors to be considered is huge. And I think they've understood that pretty quick, and then they focused on possibilities of simply removing annoyances. And I think that's what drove the inquiry forward. They really sort of thought, oh, if I get this data pretty quick, my life could be easier. I could be just like smile more in my work, and that was really engaging.
Okay. Good. Now, as an opponent, I should also oppose things I heard and I read. So let's turn to the first 4 papers. And you start also in the very beginning of your thesis by looking at what a vision is. And I think we can safely agree that paper 1 is a vision paper, and you state that also. Can you summarize again what a vision really is? And can you also then explain how you used visions in papers 2, 3, and 4?
All right.
That would be very helpful for the discussion afterwards.
So, I mean, again, I'm going to explain what the vision is in the understanding of that thesis, and I'm not going to like aspire to explain this as sort of a broader concept. But within what we applied is very much what's in the Quigley paper that I cited quite extensively. So it's a description of a possible future that contributes with scenarios and ways that the future can be improved, can be an improvement over the status quo, if you will. And then in paper 1, we sort of broadly create one of those visions, and perhaps most importantly, we try to convince the reader that it's based on our work and the work that other people have done, and it also answers to needs that have been postulated in a variety of sources. And then, but this is, as you know, it is pretty futuristic. If I can just bring this up, if I can. Wait. I mean, we had, if I can have some anecdotal evidence over here. Let me just. So we showed this figure, and then we had Danielle Fisher from Microsoft Research come in and tell me that, well, you've just discovered the worst camping trip ever, if you look at the middle picture. And I tend to agree in hindsight. And so you can see that we went for a very sort of futuristic outlook, where we said, all right, the devices are going to be everywhere, and this is in line with a lot of past work. And how do we make sense out of it? And then we tried to suggest a number of purposes they could be used. But then, given that context, well, I mean, it is nice to theorize, and it's nice to try to predict the future on paper. But then in the next 3 papers, we tried to build systems that could at least approximate a bit how that vision could pan out, and through prototyping and through studies, see if what we've proposed there actually makes any sense, to be honest.
So I was, now comes the interesting part. I was a bit concerned about 2, 3, and 4, in particular when you compared it to like this idea of having multiple devices and basically bring your own tabletop by putting things together, junkyard, jumbotron, whatever we want to call it. And you compared that to a tabletop, which is bulky, which is very expensive. Is this a vision? Will they be bulky and expensive in 5 years?
Well, if you look at the progression of tabletop technology, and you can also look in the sort of hype cycle that Fjeld and Müller-Thomfeld have written about, many people think that tabletop technology is on the brink of collapse, basically, and it is, and it has to be. While the interaction paradigm is good and it has proven to be effective and user friendly, the sort of the physical constraints of a table that doesn't move are a bit too bulky and too complex. So you from a chiefly technical perspective, you're looking for something. You should be looking for something to replace it. And sort of towards our idea that using multiple devices could be a good replacement, because even if the table is ultra light, it's still going to be a table, and sort of the physical limitations will still be there.
So if I understood that correctly, you're going to these ideas. Your vision is devices will be, well, not just yours. Many people have that. Devices will be everywhere in all possible form factors. We can carry them around. But the way you depict them, except for paper one, the way you depict them is always like sort of, I'm going to call it as it is, a brick.
No.
So it's always very rigid. It's something I can destroy Windows with. Is this to some extent for me is not a vision. For me, a vision was the one part is, yes, we will have devices everywhere. I agree with that. But then all these devices that we have everywhere are the devices we already have.
Yep.
So I was lacking that part of the vision here. So can you elaborate on that a little?
So I mean, definitely. I mean, paper one is visionary. The other two are very more pragmatic. And of course, if we wanted to run studies, we had to run them with things that we can actually get hold of. And I hope that at least many sort of, and I do agree that definitely it's a big limitation that they are essentially bricks, things that you cannot break. And we know that sort of bendables and deformables are a trend, and they are likely to come soon. And I hope that those papers, like in the sort of, if you look at these in 2 or 3 years, of course it won't be actual anymore, because the devices will no longer be bricks, but perhaps on the meta level, on the interaction pattern level, on the importance of spatial awareness level, they can still be relevant for those future devices, like the ones we have here, for example. So like in that example, like this spatial awareness and the fact that you can manipulate multiple objects in creative ways to perform a number of tasks is still relevant, I believe. And our studies, especially if you compare them with stuff that other people have done, definitely confirm that these aspects are important, and in future interfaces they have to be investigated more. So,
okay, there was this aspect, and I think, yeah, you talked about that too, where you said like you can look in the very distant future, what happens in 100 years, and you can look in what happens the next 5 to 10 years. So we can safely agree maybe in the next 10 to 5 years, we probably still run around with these things. Maybe they're slightly bendable. I doubt that they will be paper-like. That'll come a bit later. And they probably might be able to sense in relation to each other where they are. I don't know if you were at WIST last year or if you've seen the proceedings. There's a paper called TRACO that you know, where they very accurately can track where devices are in relation to each other based on sound. So that's basically here. So we're done. Vision solved. What comes next? So what do you build on top now? Now that your vision within a year was realized, so that's not a very distant future. I
mean, an obvious limitation of the papers that are here in the thesis is that they are in lab context, and this is, we sort of tried to hint on that in the first paper. It's because there's like, and even if you look at work that's like almost 10 years old now, there's a lot of work on multi-device environments, and there's very little done in the wild. So as a field, we still have no idea if this actually makes any sense. If you actually go to a cafe, you go to a pub, because what you see if you go to a pub in Sweden now is people staring at their phones, and sort of. So for me, the big question is first to verify if those fancy technological features can actually foster interactions that are sort of for collocated people in social contexts.
But you still focus on devices. So this is maybe the discussion we're having here is there's this one trend. We get more and more devices, right? I mean, I don't know if everyone sitting here in this room has probably tens of computers at home. If you drive a BMW, you have hundreds of computers in your car. So we have more and more devices, yet if we look at trends within a field called augmented reality, which was laughed at in the 80s because no one wanted to carry a computer in the backpack, and then in the 90s almost forgotten, and all of a sudden it's back. And now people laugh at it and they say, yes, these goggles, no one's going to walk around with them. And I agree with that. No one's going to do that. Yet in 10 or 15 or 20 years, we have contact lenses that do the exact same thing. And look at that, people are going to do that because it doesn't look stupid to run around with a huge goggles on your head. And to challenge you a little bit, if that were the case, I would argue the number of devices would be reduced. So they will actually go back. There's no need for me anymore if I have my information available and there's some meaningful interaction with that. Why do I need to use a phone? Why? Well, okay, I need to make phone calls maybe, but there's not many devices I need anymore. And I think many of your visions are actually doable with that. So sometimes people wonder, what is the real vision behind it? Was it that we can move a tablet next to a mobile phone and they can track each other, or was it more that I have views that are next to each other, that I move in whatever means, right?
Yeah. So I think we, especially in paper 4, we really tried to sort of we made a similar reflection. We're trying to resolve that issue. We're looking into how important it is to have information organized and how information containers are important. I mean, if you look into this scenario, we've already made do with the concept of unitary devices. They're no longer units. They are sort of like the device concept is sort of flexible, so wanes in the but we still have the concept of information container, which seems sort of more deeply embedded in the sort of interaction that we used to, and in paper number 4, you can see that sort of actually having information in discrete containers is beneficial to the task. So I feel, well, I do agree that probably the concept of device will disappear, or at least there will be less devices because they will be more versatile. Or I mean, there's a number of papers also say that the devices will switch from private to shared. So they'll be available in the environment instead of being available in your pocket. I still feel that certain things that we learn from cognition, certain things that we sort of know about fundamentals of interaction, they will stay the same whatever the medium of interaction is.
So how would you, now thinking about it this way, I mean the papers are 2-3 years old, in that range, or 1 to 2 years, so fairly new still. What is the real value behind them? What do we get out of that? If you, let's say this future we just talked about is now here, what can we use them for, really? It's a bit of an offensive question, but on purpose. Yeah,
I mean, I feel that you can. It's easiest to see. I would say we've contributed a number of interaction patterns there that are especially if you, as you say, you have the technology. There's this very pragmatic view that you can take on the papers and simply say, oh, now we have the technology, we have the possibilities to test it in the wild, do a wider testing. These are the interaction partners that you probably want to start with. and go from there. That's a very pragmatic view. But sort of in a broader sense, and that's what we have in paper 4, is that there are certain mechanics that work for certain tasks, and that is unlikely to change. For example, like we had the bezels playing a big role in the sense-making process, or at least we believe so based on the results. And that's a more reusable takeaway. You probably want whatever your future interface, be it augmented reality, virtual reality, a magic tabletop that changes form, you still want to enable people to have bezels, and you still want to enable them to efficiently manipulate the data spatially to have an efficient sense-making process.
So when you say spatially here, do you mean 2D or 3D?
We discussed that there as well. We didn't get results that would sort of enable me to say now that we believe that yes, the 3D dimension is super important as well, but there are certainly groups of users that use 3D. So there's definitely a design space to be explored there.
Yeah.
Even though if you look at the traditional sort of context of sense making, it's usually 2D.
Yeah, that was my first impression as well. It's like, because you talk in the papers fairly often about 6 degrees of freedom. And I thought, like, yeah, well, tracking has 6 degrees of freedom. Let me see, I have that written down. Yeah, so in paper 2, you talk about 6 degrees of freedom tracking, which is true. I mean, you use something similar to an OptiTrack or Vicon. And then in paper 4, you talk about that the 6 degrees of freedom can be used for swiping things from one screen to another. Yeah. So what do we need 6 degrees of freedom for that?
Well, I mean, in sort of top right-hand corner, you can see that we've actually had users who they like to hover a tablet over one and then sort of pour stuff on top of it, in a sort of like a liquid kind of metaphor. And it seemed like the fact that they knew it was tracked in 3D gave them more interaction possibilities. Plus, I mean, there's this also very pragmatic point of view that if you look at the possible future tracking technologies, they will enable that either way. So it's a good avenue to explore to see what the benefits could be. And I would like to sort of also say that, I mean, a thing that we could definitely not write in the papers, but it's definitely inspired that the first 4 papers is that we have we have paid a visit to a company that actually has this technology working, but it's secret. But we sort of like very early in my PhD, I did see 2 devices with no external aids that offered full spatial awareness, and we also know that this will be eventually on the market.
Full spatial tracking between each other, so it's relative tracking, right? Which is good enough. I think Traco does nothing else in that. Going a little bit into paper 3, I was wondering on page 73, your contributions that you state, and I actually need to open it. So this is just a bigger version, but it's the same. It's a printout because I didn't want to ruin the nice book. And then I didn't mark anyways, so I said page 73. I'm going to read that out. You write here in the middle of the page, Thaddeus is a novel contribution to the domain of multi-display environments as it, 1, focuses solely on a single user, multiple device usage scenario. Okay. 2nd, investigates mutual spatial positioning as an input source. 3, uses only mobile devices with no stationary solutions, e.g. projections or interactive tables. And 4, anticipates upcoming mobile sensing technology. And the question I wrote down to this particular thing is, how is this different from F formations or gradual engagement? So do you know about these 2 papers? I would assume you do. Not everyone here probably knows, so maybe you summarize them real quick, the core idea, and then tell me what is different to your
I mean, so I mean, maybe I just explained, I mean, the exact motivation behind what we wrote over there. The issue we've been facing while writing this paper is to be explicit how this work was different from sort of what was then called multi-device environments or MSEs, which was basically Mega on the center and those kinds of table-oriented things. And we tried to we try to show that we're not investigating control rooms, we're not investigating those sort of the kind of stuff they were looking at, so sort of corporate settings or lunchroom settings or that kind of stuff. And instead we were sort of focusing on the sort of just the two devices, things that you may already have, instead of bringing in new stuff. And perhaps we just in plain words, we wanted to state that these are the four things that differentiates us from the work on what was they called multi-screen environments, actually.
Yeah. So I want to stay at that a little bit. If we drill or untangle them one by one. So the first contribution was focuses solely on a single user multiple device usage scenario. When people read that as standalone, they might not believe it's a contribution because they think like a single user is not the hard part. Multiple users will be, but we can discuss that at some point. But this is definitely different from these other two papers I mentioned. But now number 2 investigates mutual spatial positioning as an input source. That is in itself not new.
Yeah,
right?
that is true. And even, I mean, you have to we're in 2012 now, we have to sort of take that perspective. But
that's when you designed it, because the paper is 14. Right?
Yeah, but sort of like was 2012, 2013 when we actually worked on it. So that also gives it, and by that time we indeed have some papers that take the mutual spatial location. Perhaps what was hot then was the work by Andres Lucero and the photo sharing Nokia app, just before I moved out of Nokia. But what we wanted to say, that I think we try to elaborate a bit more, that is that we actually take the spatial input as a sort of one-to-one input modality, because what they do, they all the passwords, there was some other input, and then they sort of considered the spatial context. While here with failures, you can actually directly manipulate data through changing the positions or the relative positions of the two devices.
Okay, so it's solely about input source between or from one device to no, actually to the system that runs on two devices. Okay. 3 uses only mobile devices. Okay, most of the stuff that Nick did, no, Affirmations only used mobile devices.
That's true.
Which is, okay.
It is. I think I don't have like perfect memory, but I may have not been aware of that paper by that time.
To be fair, it was with 2012, so very late.
Yeah.
In 2012, sometime October, and then anticipates upcoming mobile sensing technology. Yeah, that's a given. That's what tech-driven papers do. Good, and then okay, so we clarified that. Got a bit challenging. The last segment, no, actually two last segments I have. While reading over papers 3 and 4, I think we should really look a little bit at the evaluations you ran and especially the statements you derived out of that. And this is something we do very often, is we design studies in a way that our system shines. And if we can't do that, then we do something else, which is also contained here, which is we didn't find a significant difference, so they're equal, or they appear to be equal. I'd like you to comment on that specifically. What happens if we don't find a statistically significant difference? What do we do then?
Well, I mean, to a extent, we did that in the Fadius paper. So over there, I mean, the system did not perform better than the baseline established. So when we said it's not worse. And I mean, I think I even in the discussion, the fees that I tried to hint on that, and I specifically referred to Casper Hornbeck's paper on reporting bad results. And of course, well, it's always a publication issue. Usually try to explain that, and I think in the Fadius paper that's exactly what we did. So we sort of we got the sort of non-significant differences, and then we said, well, this is what we can learn from it. And in our case, we said that it's probably not worse. And then considering the technical constraints that are in place, we can anticipate that once those constraints are taken away, the system is likely to perform well. But I think, I mean, at least we tried to sort of the takeaway from that, the main takeaway from that paper to be those those interaction patterns, and the sort of and in all honesty, the study was just to just there to show that the system worked and to provide the evidence that we've built it, and we did test it with users, and the insights that are contained within the paper are based on engaging with real people.
Yeah, but if we want to show that something works, as you said, that was your main outset to do. If you want to show that something works, what do you normally do? Because what would be a result that confirms that something actually works? Well,
if you take an engineering sort of point of view, it would be you'd write a functional test and run it, of course. But I guess, I mean, within an HCI context, that's not what we do. We actually sort of, the working is the technicalities being in place and correct. But we also have this idea that it actually makes at least a bit of sense to people. And there's at least we can create a limited but believable context for the particular system in which the users feel it's meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think we showed that in 5 years.
Yeah, no, I thought it was. This is really like, this is nitpicking already. Where I stumbled across some formulations that I was a little bit concerned about, because it's my gut feeling is always, I don't find a statistically significant difference. That doesn't mean that there's no difference. It just means I didn't find it.
Yeah.
So I usually refrain from making comments about that, and then. And you said that right, it's like for the means of publication, you need to show something, which is more like the big problem of our community, I think. And you nicely, I thought, like, how long can you maintain to say between the lines? And about 2 pages. you were pretty advocate about it, which I like, because I'm pretty much on your side on that. I mentioned another way of showing that a system works, and that's to use, and now I'm very offensive, that's to use an unfair comparison. And I believe that is what happened in paper 4. When you look at, so for several measures actually, on several levels. The one level was you looked at movements of post-its and movements of containers. And I need to, let me see. Yeah, page 99 and then page 102. 102 answers that a little bit. And that was how you move, when you move the entire tablet, was that considered as a move of a single post-it, move of a container, or not as a move at all? And that is a bit fuzzy. So we need to be careful with that, because it seemed at some point you used the numbers the way that they actually make your system stand out. And then the question is more, if you look at the paper-based, this is more like here. If you look at the paper-based condition, where you only had post-it notes, there's no paper underneath, which people, when they do mind mapping, will do very often. That they put a huge, like, A2, A1, A0 paper underneath. I can scribble around. Paper is, like, inexpensive. So that's a neat factor. That was ruled out here, so that makes it rather unfair already towards the tabletop, because the tabletop would support that. And then the tabletop supports something that your system doesn't support. So I question whether or not these systems are comparable at all. I would like to hear your comments on that.
I mean, the most ironic thing is that we would never expect that the paper would underperform. We were quite convinced. The sort of our initial hypothesis was that the paper will outperform all the other systems. But of course, the issue with paper is that you don't have pre-printed posters 99% of the time, and preparing the environment is the infrastructural cost that is probably not acceptable in most situations, especially if it's rapid analysis. But we still wanted to compare it to see if the sort of not interaction patterns, but the strategies employed and sort of how the grouping works out, if the way people do it on paper will translate to the digital domain. But instead, we got results as you've seen them. So we got a result where the paper is the slowest method to do it. And I mean, I think again, in a way, we go into back to the sort of questioning the stats, because I mean the stats work nicely in this paper, But the number of given that it's a complex process with multiple users involved, number of factors that influence those results is really hard to control. And I dare say that one of those very important factors here was who the actual users were, because it is highly dependent on the cognitive capacities of the users. So it could have just been that we had smarter users in the other scenarios. And I think we do hint at that in the limitations.
Yeah.
And again, it's so back to this scenario where we're trying to illustrate that it works for a study with some significant differences, written in a very Kai-like style for it to fit the conference. But I still would like to stress that I do feel that the contribution is somewhere over there, and I do agree with your comments over there. Like that the table over there, we didn't use this background because we actually wanted to showcase that one of the huge advantages of the paper is that the space is unlimited, which it didn't turn out that way. So that in our study, the advantage of having unlimited space or virtually unlimited space for paper didn't help the paper. And then the tabletop was built the way it was built because it was based on systems that were previously published. So we adopted this, which is also advised by Casper Hornberg, by the way, the comparison where you use systems that are already used in practice somewhere else. So we adopted this philosophy here. But I do agree that, for example, we could have implemented some of the extra support on a tabletop. And perhaps that would have been a fairer comparison, but then on the other hand, someone could undermine the study saying that, but then the way you design those features on the tabletops, because that's new, also makes an unfair comparison. So we did want to compare these, and we primarily wanted to learn from how the user strategies change between those modalities. But again, because you need a study, we had to run the stats on it.
You need a study for
publication, unfortunately. And you also asked about the containers. So that's the way we counted these was also heavily influenced by the way the analysis was done. So we only had 2 camera angles, and because it was like many hours of video material, we had multiple coders executing that, and we had to write the instructions in a clear way so that one hand movement is one, because otherwise we would get different interpretations and just less reliable numbers.
Good. Then let us go to math. No, real quick. I want to stay at the studies. You describe on page 38 something about a good or a better study. Can you elaborate on what that is? A good? I think it was good study. Let me find that. 38. That was paper. It was here on the top, right? It was in paper 3, I think. You cite Casper here also in 2011. Because you question this idea of, or you don't question, you question that HCI doesn't allow so much for incremental work, right? Mm-hmm. Or you're upset with that. And I remember Patrick Bowdish very vividly in front of me when we did Touch Projector, because that was very incremental. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, when you think about certain things, do we always have to compare to baselines, for example? Do you, like here you chose specifically paper as a baseline, and paper is something this will be very hard to be outperformed in the next 100 years or longer, because it has been around for a couple of thousand years, and we get used to it. So do we always have to compare to a baseline, or is there other ways of evaluating things, or validating? Maybe let's call it more validation.
I feel that from a again from a pragmatic point of view, perhaps the baseline comparison is the easiest to conduct. But then, I mean, we see many papers where people compare features or compare details. If it's more focused on a particular design pattern or a particular feature, or if it's a really tech-focused paper when it concerns a use or a particular technology, then you can just focus on that and eliminate many of the number of factors that influence the study, like we had here, for example.
Okay. Good. Then the really last thing, if you could open up your model. I was sometimes little bit confused that sometimes you call it model, then you call it framework, and at one point you actually state that you want to call it model.
Yeah. So if I can clarify that.
Yes.
So the issue is that from my perspective, it more fits into the description of a framework, because it is sort of, especially if you look at the Obranovich understanding of framework, when it sort of gives a prescription for an inquiry on it, or in that case, a prescription of how to do a reflection. But then, because frameworks is already a term that's used within and extensively within the literature that I cited, I opted for model for lexical reasons.
Yeah. So given that this is a framework / model, let's call it framework because it is. How many other papers, other than your own work, and not related, not where you actually got these terms out, how many other papers have you placed in there over your time being?
So the kind of sanity check that I did on that, and we had a discussion with staff when we decided not to include that in the thesis. But what I did, I placed the papers that I most admire on the model, and I sort of thought about the kind of work that I would really like to do over there, and I also looked at some like classical stuff, and at least it appeared to me, and of course that's wishful thinking, but many of them can be fit into that model, and we also tried to sort of think how we could place the stuff we're currently working on in that model, and it sort of works. I mean, I write explicitly in the thesis that this is definitely not comprehensive, but I hope it just triggers people to reflect a bit, and that is the primary purpose. But I'm far from claiming that you can place everything on it. I mean, I even place some of my stuff outside of it.
Yeah, so. that was quite. I looked at that and it's like, look at that. It's like you have 8 papers, 1 doesn't fit. That's a quite high miss ratio. But how often did you revise it when you start placing things in? Because this is usually a point in time where you design spaces / models / frameworks, whatever you want to call it, where you start refining things. When you fit 10 papers in, it's, oh, this works nicely. You have the next paper, it's, doesn't fit. How often did you do that?
So I sort of like, I think so my intention was that I really, I'm comfortable with the placement of the terms before I do the papers. So I actually revised the placement of the terms way more than the placement of the papers. And over there, it's like there's this sort of different progressions, and sort of this is the same progression that Jonas has in his work. And I discuss a bit about that progression in the thesis as well. And so I did revise that a lot, and then I tried to be really objective with placing the papers. Of course, that's not humanly possible, but I tried to do it sort of. So I gave this a week or two, so just allowed myself to forget all the extra thinking I had behind it, and then I tried to place them. I think we moved them around just a couple of times then, after discussing with my supervisors. Okay. But I mean, they already you can see that they came in a nice line, which helps, but also come in like those chunks, which sort of hints on the way that I thought about them, and that's of course that's definitely subjective. Yeah,
I would have expected chunks. No. Given that you don't do your PhD for 20 years. Otherwise, you have a little bit more distributed there. What comes next, tech-driven or user-driven for you?
Well, I'm negotiating it, but like my heart is with user-driven.
User-driven. Okay. I'm pretty much through with my interrogation of you. Hope it wasn't too harsh, particularly the second part. Thanks much for the thesis. I think it's pretty good.
Thank you so much.
And you tell us now how we proceed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a very interesting discussion, and the discussion and the interrogation will continue. So now it's time for the examination committee, and I think we will start with Professor Hans Gellesen.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you very much for your discussion. Um, so a thesis gives us the benefit of hindsight in a way. You know, you write your papers, and when you write them, that's within a certain context. There are deadlines to meet, and there are expectations of the specific conference you target that are in your head, and so on. And so a thesis is really a wonderful opportunity to then look back at the work and challenge the original conclusions that you drew. You know, you've moved on, you've developed new perspectives, other work has happened. So I would really like you to pick either all the work of that you mostly discussed in the end, sort of the spatial awareness work, or take all the sports work and tell me how, in hindsight, you think differently about these works now than you expressed in the conclusions that we see written down for the respective papers.
So, I mean, I'm going to take what we discussed with Sebastian, because he's already hinted a bit on that. So, and when you mentioned those 4 points, I think it was sort of, you got right on that. Because over the context of that work has, throughout my PhD, has changed a lot. So, in the beginning, and I think you can see that spirit in the papers. We're really excited about the tech, and we claim a lot. Oh, this is spatial awareness as input. This is new. Probably you can use it in a number of scenarios. But sort of, if you look at it now, and I try to hint on that in the thesis as well. It's more about sort of meta level. It's more what we have in the latest paper. It's more about the fact that there are certain interaction patterns that possibly could be applied to the spatial awareness, and it's also about that there are probably some basic things about how people work with information that we should still investigate, because no matter where the spatial awareness thing goes, these are likely to be important. So this is, I hope the reader can see the evolution that is over there. Like at least if you look at the papers chronologically, papers 2 and 3, they are sort of hyper enthusiastic over there, and paper 4 is a bit more down to earth, saying that yeah, the tech is important, the tech is there, it's developing, but there are certain fundamental things that we should look on.
Let me probe a bit further. Maybe you could pull out for me sort of what you see as questions that you arrive at now that you look back, either for that work or for the sports work again. But really, you know, with the hindsight you have now, you should be able to tell us more about what we should really be asking, not just reporting, this is what I asked at the time, this is what my thinking at the time, this, you know. You've moved on now. What should we be asking about? What are for you the big questions that come from this?
So allow me to take the sports, because that's, I mean, currently it's a bit more dynamic, and I think it's, especially when we started, it was a really small field, and now there's more and more people working in that, and there's new questions. And so over the one thing that is clearly emerging, and we did hint on that, but we feel we need to work way more on it, is the importance of play, and how do we integrate all the stuff that we need about play and the way people engage in sports, and how do we translate that into design and technology. Because as you can see, we've already explored motivation to some extent, and there have been some other people who have explored motivation, but our understanding of play and how to design for play in physical activities is very, very basic. And we're actually in the process of at least building a theoretical background to do it. But you can see that our works are definitely hinting on that, but also missing a bit of insights there. So I think for HCI and sports, the next big thing will be how to seamlessly integrate elements of play into supporting regular advanced physical activity.
Right. If you realize that, suppose you realize that earlier how would you have done I mean, pick either sports paper. How would it have changed your approach to the research?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, I think you can see that in the motivation paper. So, paper 6, we do touch on the playfulness bit, but only a bit, and we could have definitely explored this as a design theme. We could have incorporated playful elements in the follow-up in the Rufus paper. We could have explored that as a possible feature for the system. If you could make the cheering a playful experience for the runner or the supporters of both. And that's sort of a design dimension that we're perhaps not focusing on, not fully aware of when we were designing the prototype.
Okay, good. But you keep this at a very general level, sort of yeah, we could take playfulness more into account. But what is it really? What if you did the work again? How would your questions be different that you ask, and how would you actually go about doing the work differently?
To put it very sort of pragmatically, I would definitely ask if we could make the cheering into a game experience where it becomes. Is it more engaging if people compete who is cheering a bit more, or could this have elements of play? Because could we build a system that will make cheering not only into a social activity, but also into a fun activity?
Okay.
All right, thank you. Yeah, nice. Okay, how about this? Good. Yeah, nice work, fun to read.
Thank you.
Quite curious. You get the sense of a curious person probing into different areas and coming up with interesting stuff, which is, of course, essential for a design researcher. I had a couple of big picture type questions, but before, I'd just like to follow up on the topic that Hans opened. I don't understand how you can distinguish social from fun. Where did that come from? How were you thinking just now?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely cannot. That's for sure. It was just that sort of the design lens that we applied over there, or the sort of the preliminary design empathy stuff we did was just focused on the family. It was focused on how the friend network supports the runner, and we could have just asked people what makes running fun, what makes it an experience that's worth having, and we only did that later. And I think we should still explore that a bit more.
Again, I don't follow. An experience worth having as something other than social doesn't make sense to me. But maybe I'm just misunderstanding your words here, so I'll drop that for now. I'd like to ask a question about the framework/model, the CTF. Let's call it the CTF. It's clear to me that it serves a very useful purpose from the point of tying together a PhD into something that comes out as a more coherent piece rather than just a bunch of stapled Chi papers. Question is, what do you see as the purpose of this beyond doing its job for the PhD? Is there another purpose for the CTF? How do you envision this coming into play in the community for your own practice, for my work?
Yeah, so I mean,
specific, please.
So I tried to hint a bit on that in the thesis, but perhaps I should have been more explicit. So I came into that work from a very engineering-oriented background, just a guy discovering that you can actually do design, and it's dare I say, legit way to do work in research. And then you enter this magical world of writing about how you engage with the everyday and how you engage with design methodologies, and you read stuff about design thinking. And if you have this sort of engineering kind of approach in the back of your head, you have this intrinsic need for a structure. And I tried to do that here to some extent, sort of to at least to have some sort of a preliminary roadmap that enables one to sort of to choose where to contribute. But I do not claim that this is comprehensive or exhaustive. I actually, from a personal point of view, one of the main findings for me while writing this thesis was how much more literature I would need to engage with to build a bigger glimpse of what that could be. So that model is written from a very pragmatical perspective when I've only taken the stuff that is available within the larger HCI publishing stuff, but it's so deeply tied into more traditional design research that in order for this to explain more, it would definitely need to be expanded. But I still think from a very pragmatical perspective of a person that is coming with an engineering background and wants to engage more with the everyday and wants to engage more with the user, that could be a useful tool to simply choose where I want to contribute in that way.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think actually a whole lot of sense from your point of view. And possibly also to other readers with a similar background. And perhaps you should even pitch it as a lens to use if you want to explore into other literatures. Because as you say, you are intentionally limiting yourself to the CHI.
Yeah.
Sorry, the HCI literature. Those are very much overlapping these days, as we know. And you do that intentionally. And this is what you get out of sort of inductively reflecting over what you find there. And I think it's a fair depiction. At the same time, looking at it from other standpoints, it has a number of problems, as you can imagine. And those are probably for you to find out as you start reading into different literatures. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense, actually. Can I do one more?
Yeah, if I can just comment, I would just like say that like the stack of books of my nightstand is saying a lot of things about it that are wrong, but I am fully aware of that. But it's an exciting thing to do next.
Yeah, I mean, this is stuff you work on for your whole life, and there are milestones where you need to report something, and you can only report what you have at that time, and no one is expecting you to have perfect knowledge ever. That's the point of being a researcher. So we just muddle on. Some of us have done it for a few more years, but we basically do the same thing. The other thing, also a big picture, sweeping, broad brush kind of question, it concerns your notion of tech-driven research or tech-driven inquiry. I think you state in several places that tech-driven inquiry requires quantitative evaluation. Is that another example of your abstracting the CHI community's values, or is it something that you personally think and believe? Which one?
Yeah, I think it's in a way both, but more on the I'd say trying to abstract the CHI community values, and I think I try to sort of in between the lines convey that if you're doing a tech-driven thing, it's simply expected to do more quantitative stuff. And I think it's also like a very sort of human thing where the tech-driven stuff usually comes by the people who are fascinated by tech. And I made this, I guess you can see that in the fees, I made that shift there on the way as well. And I think those tech-fascinated people do have a more engineering-oriented background, and then they strive for the quantitative a bit more. So yeah, I'd say it's a bit of both, but in what I wrote to the thesis, I tried to sort of convey that from a pragmatic publication CHI community point of view, if you're claiming that this is future tech, then you probably want some numbers in the paper.
Can you see any other ways in which tech-driven inquiry could yield knowledge contributions? that would be worthwhile for a community, not necessarily the Kai community?
I mean, there's a tradition that is chiefly Scandinavian, I'd say, of doing those explorative in the wild studies with prototypes, and very explorative prototypes. Say, for example, the work they did in Aarhus in shopping, and sort of the ways you can augment shopping experiences, where they have like paper prototype brought into real stores. That's in a way that's tech-driven inquiry, because they are anticipating the tech that is going to come and looking for ways to deal with that. But then they are looking more on the user experience side. But then you see it written up in design journals, and sort of just going outside of the HCI community. Yeah, I mean, in my position, I'm sort of not to say if that's good or not.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I wouldn't perhaps call that tech-driven. It's more like a UX intervention kind of approach, but it's definitely true that it ends up in other fora. Yeah, so maybe that's another part of your homework once you happily prance along as a postdoc, finding out other ways in which you can put your skills and your training to more effective use in terms of knowledge production, beyond building stuff that can be tested empirically and yield some numbers. Because I think you are selling yourself super short in that approach. So there is much more potential, I would say. I'll just pass on to Urban.
Thank you. Thank you for discussion and an interesting thesis. I would like to start out on page 138 in the middle. You write that according to the academic convention, we did not report many failed designs. But on the other side, page 139, you write that there is consensus that a lot can be learned even from failed designs. So how do you deal with what is a failure and what is not a failure here? Because it can produce knowledge, even if it's a failure.
Yes, I think, I mean, in a way, what I'm trying to do there is sort of deal with this dissonance between the two. So on one hand, we have the writing, Casper, for example, that's saying that we should report the failures and learn from our mistakes. But on the other hand, we have the everyday practice of submitting to major conferences, where it's not customary to have those. And I mean, there's like on one hand, there's like the wide body of writing in e.g. the Kai conference shows you that these are already reported. On the other hand, we have a number of works claiming that we should do that. And I'm sort of, without jumping to any conclusions, I'm just trying here to sort of let the reader know that the truth is probably somewhere in between, and say that, well, we wrote this paper the way we wrote it because we wanted to get this published, but we have probably not saved some of the information to ourselves had we known that the convention could accommodate a bit more of the failure bits, if you will.
Okay. In the preface, you write that I have no idea how I got here. I mean, coming here and starting this. So you were kind of a, excuse me for the words, like a virgin entering academia. Then on page 211, you're still a young researcher, which is true, but still a bit more mature. And then you very explicitly, as Jonas and also yourself talked about before, that what features make a paper more likely to be accepted. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit on you as a researcher. I mean, you've done the basic training now, and you're out on the market, being someone that wants to be accepted. How will that affect your coming research, if that is sort of a goal in itself?
I think, I mean, I mean, what I wanted to is I'm like that you pointed out that one of the bits, the beginning of the book, and the other is more towards the end, because I wanted this to be sort of express that journey that I made from the sort of super optimistic kind of person. Not that I'm not optimistic anymore, but I what I did pick up on a way is how to write things up, so that they look good on paper, and these are the skills I definitely did not have when I started. I came in with the face of Mark Weiser on my heart, and just like, we're going to change the world now here. But then it's the everyday atomic work that you just make little contributions, and just you move the knowledge just by tiny bits, and then you quickly learn that you cannot do too much. It takes time and effort and patience. And so this is the one reason I tried to say that, and I think. Given that I have like some experience now writing those papers, I also know how to convey some messages so that they're more explicit, and I think I know ways to write things in a way that, even though perhaps they're not the most anticipated things, they are still messages that are understandable. Well, in the beginning, I really needed to stick to the very basic stuff, because I didn't know how to write each thing, so I had to like convey the main message. And now it's more about I feel I'm a bit more able to discuss things.
Okay, but I hope you agree with me that research is not something that is only 16 pages long. It's something much more than page limits. One more question that I would like to ask. You talk about different reference disciplines, but I couldn't find really that you related to information systems, because there was one sentence here: understanding the user needs and the design context prior to the design intervention can constitute a viable and sometimes generalizable contribution. So how familiar are you with, because this is pretty much the core of information systems. How familiar are you with that field?
Yeah, this is me just being too continental, to be honest. It's like, I mean, the sort of informatics kind of, as it is understood over here, is a sort of it's a spread between disciplines on the continent, and this is just me writing from a very continental perspective. Definitely you can phrase that as information systems, and I am well aware that sort of information system is about understanding the constraints, but sort of perhaps on a more meta level, I think sort of design is sort of deeps a bit under it, but definitely, yes.
Okay. And one final question, talking about sports. We had more than 10 years ago a thesis on sport informatics here at this department. What would you say has that field evolved since then?
I mean, the funny bit about it is that from a meta perspective, the challenges that we face are very similar to the challenges that from a sort of on the user perspective as well. The challenges mentioned there are very much like the challenges we addressed here. It is the sort of the difference between that is that we took a very sort of actionable perspective. Over there, like, they tried to sort of atomize the stuff and understand the inner workings of the experience, where we actually opted for intervention. And I guess, I mean, one idea is that within those 10 years, that methodology has become more acceptable, and we were able to do just that. But I say on a sort of user experience level, what the users need and what kind of experience needs to be supported is very similar.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify, do you have any more questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much. Then it's time for the audience to ask questions. And please try to move from making a comment in order and switch it over into a question. So some sort of question mark in the end of your comment. So please, who is willing to ask the first question? Do you have any questions?
Thank you. This is my first time that I experienced this kind of a defense, and it's quite impressive to me. Both the work of Pawel and the way it's done here. So this is very interesting for me. However, it's difficult for me to follow all the stuff because we are talking about paper number 1, number 2, and so on. It's difficult not having the book. Even if I had a book now, probably it would be difficult. However, I have a great pleasure that I work with Pawel from time to time. So more or less I know what is the work about. So my question is, the first question is about sports. I don't agree personally that you cannot distinguish between social and fun. My feeling is that social may be sometimes somehow forced by some cultural dependencies. You can take as an example a marriage, for example. And if you take marriage plus sports or hobby, you can imagine that it may be still social but not fun anymore to both sides at the same time. But anyway, from your work related to cheering runners or cheering sportsmen, it seems that your goal was to help runners to achieve better results. This could be a hypothesis. But my feeling is that you can even make more nice things to the supporters. And I would like you to comment on this.
Yeah, so if you look into the paper, the goal of the design was to make cheering and participating in a race a more engaging experience, and we did not go into results, and we did not look into performance, because actually if you look into sports psychology, performance is a totally different thing. But what I can comment on the fun and social is there's definitely a level of engagement that we tried to manage here, and there's definitely the fact of people communicating that we looked at. And if I can just bring up the slide, that'll be just easy to comment on. So here you can see that we looked into very tangible proofs. We sort of, because it was the first study of its kind, so we looked on that in very plain terms. We looked if people start to talk to each other. We looked into is this experience more than the experience used to be, and if this change affected the race positively or negatively. And unfortunately, we got a positive outcome.
So what's on the pictures here?
So what you can see here is the signals sent by the supporters and the runners. The supporters are in gray, the runners are in black, and you can see that they're a bit shifted in time, which means there's two-way communication happening. And in the second graph, you have the three types of signals split, and you can see that there's people are using the different colors. Once they are closer to the end of the race, they're using the more intensive ones more often. So we definitely did augment the experience. We did add new features to it, but I would be far from commenting, especially based on 2 and the Wild studies, how deep it affected the social landscape of running. I think that's future work.
Okay, so another comment on the spatial awareness and tabletops. We had a nice discussion with Sebastian during the lunch, so he's working on very interesting things. But on the other hand, I believe that I cannot believe that Morten said that tabletops are going to be finished in some sort of. But anyway, the table is a thing that is like known for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. So there is still something in the table that can be explored. So this special interactions between devices and the tables, I believe, have some future. And On the other hand, the technology that could be available in like few years, like maybe a bendable, slim paper-like devices, maybe will not be so tangible and handy as these bricks that we are talking about now. So my feeling is that anticipating future is not always that the technology will be, I don't know, hiding in the background more and more. This was my comment, and maybe you can add something.
I mean, I feel that, the immediate answer is, of course, if you look into the visions and the work of Hiroshi Ishii and the deformables and the radical atoms over there, he's definitely hinting on that, and there's like a concurrent vision of what basically could replace many of those tabletop interfaces. But more importantly, and that's one of the assumptions that we built our work on, is the what Pierre Diembourg calls the social constructivist flavor of tabletops. Essentially, what they claim, and they do a rather thorough literature review on how this emerges from cognition. They claim that it is the horizontal surface that's important. That as humans, it's somehow wired up in us that we have a tendency to be creative once given a horizontal surface. And we sort of in our work we've been exploring how to, based on that, how to explore that opportunity that we have horizontal surfaces around us.
Okay, let's see. Do we have any final question? Okay.
Hey, so if I'm listening to all the comments here, you have sort of received a lot of discreet criticism of not having a thesis which is conform and well planned beforehand. It would be interesting to see if you see any advantages with making a thesis which is more spread out than usual.
So I tried to hint in the thesis that I just feel extremely lucky that the people who have trusted me with the, let's put it plainly, research money, they've given me freedom to explore different things. And well, in Scandinavia, it is quite common to have this sort of open perspectives and be able to participate in a number of projects. And for me, as a person who likes to try out a lot of things, definitely trying different research methodologies and trying sort of different communities proved very interesting. And I think in a way doing new things just sort of fueled my engagement in a way, on those if you work on two projects in parallel, and that's what I often do, and if you get upset by a user or a prototype fails or something explodes, you can always turn to the other one, and there's probably a happy user there, and that helped me a lot.
Okay, thank you. I think it's time to close this part of our very important academic ritual here, and it's time to basically thank all the involved parties here with Pawel, Sebastian, and the committee. So let's give them a hand. And now it's time for the committee to have a meeting and for the audience to have, I believe there will be snacks and some drinks outside. Okay.